Awesome. And we are in and live another episode of a podcast. Your host Stephen Maxted, and really great energy guest today, Sean McRae, aka Sean Frost. And Sean, thank you for finding us. And
Yeah,
thank you
no,
for approaching us and contacting us. It was great to connect. And right away, I know that we hit on some things right away on the entrepreneurial side in terms of kind of the grind, and not to play up kind of that we'll call it like kind of like what it is, the hustle culture out there, but there is certain drive and looking to better yourself. Ultimately, we were just chatting about that for a minute before getting on here too, that we connected on right away. You have a very robust pipeline of things that you're working on, like many entrepreneurial spirited folks do. It's becomes a serial entrepreneur lifestyle, and it's really hard to put down. I'm excited to chat about the areas that you're personally interested in now, and it's quite diverse, and learn a little bit more about you personally. So, Sean, with that, do you want to introduce yourself to the listener a little bit more today and give them as headline as narrowed down? I know you got a lot of stuff on the go, so tell us what you can and share about yourself to introduce.
yeah, right on. Well, thanks, Stephen, for having me on. Yeah, it's yeah, what can I say about myself? Serial entrepreneur, came from humble beginnings. Just kind of had that fighting spirit all the way through kind of childhood and growing up. Started my first business as a music producer when I was wrapping up high school, still in high school, and then just kind of been building since, and letting things go and then circling back and living the dream, so to say. So I'm now in the real estate realm. I'm in the entertainment realm, whether it's music or wrestling. I'm a partner of our professional soccer team, our professional football club here in Ottawa with Atletico Ottawa. I very heavily involved in community engagement and community give back, mainly in part with Atletico Ottawa. That's kind of our the synergy between us, that we really aim to kind of give back and help those in need. All the while, of course, raising awareness for soccer in the community. So, yeah, man, excited to be here and looking forward to getting down to it.
Awesome. No, that's great. And Sean, can we go back to how you got started? It's one of my favorite questions to ask. And you mentioned in high school music production and producing, I guess, in there. I'm not sure if I'm even saying that correctly. Not my niche, not my genre for sure. But we do a little bit on the podcast side now, and I'm sure there's a little relatability to what you were doing back then and to what we're doing now. But how did that get started, and how'd you get into that?
Yeah, so great question. That's been my first passion, my first love, as far as I can remember. So essentially, taking it way back, my dad's a singer. So he was, I saw him every Wednesday and every second weekend. My parents aren't together, which is all good. It worked out perfectly for me. It was such a blessing. So it was, being able to spend good quality time with each parent. My dad made it a point. Both my parents are into music, but my dad made it a point that, as a kid, rather than necessarily taking me to the toy store, we got into a habit of he would take me to the music store. So he would take me to the record store and basically let me to pick out any music that I wanted. And my mom was super cool with it as well. So, there weren't any restrictions. It was literally wherever my ears took me, that's where I went. So I was able to build quite a diverse and eclectic collection at a very, very young age. I was going to daycare carrying around a briefcase full of music rather than bringing toys, right? So, and then from there, my dad was always friends with sound men and engineers. So I was super fortunate that anytime a big rock band or whoever was coming to Ottawa, I was able to tag along as a kid. And then even short kind of tours, like jumping on a quick tour bus and not necessarily going anywhere, but at least experiencing the tour bus and all the behind the scenes and backstage stuff, sound checks, running the boards, was super interesting.
Awesome.
And I got to do that as a young kid because I was a cute kid. So, all these bands would kind of just take me under their wing and take me along. And my dad would kind of be either tag along or be like, all right, well, he's in good hands and he's not going far.
Awesome.
Yeah. So I got a taste at a really young age. So I just felt like I was kind of destined to do that. So I started making beats, and I had a couple reps here and there selling music for me abroad. And I was doing stuff locally and, going to high school and just making some money.
That is super awesome. I think it's just really cool to hear that too, because from, education in certain areas, I think is very important, but having that hands-on and kind of being a part of the journey and learning business by witnessing it. I've been talking about this a lot lately, not on podcasts, but on one-on-one calls, and just saying like how important I think that really is for development. And the reason why I think a lot of folks do get into business or why they have success is just observing so many different things at an early age. Like we're such sponges. The subconscious is so strong in that way. And I think that that's an awesome way that you got into that, was kind of literally the way that I heard you say it there, but kind of being hands-on early in, and maybe initially, kind of more playing around with things, more of a game than really work. But I mean, if you really like what you do, it kind of is a game anyways. And you're just kind of, pulling those levers there. And so what was then after like that stage and then kind of following into the kind of pathway to modern day without, or discussing whatever you'd like to in this topic, but what was the progression of that and where did that take things to, and where did you kind of level up from there?
Yeah. So great question as well. I actually ended up dropping down.
It happens.
But that's good. No, it was a blessing, in hindsight. I wouldn't change a thing. At the time it didn't feel great, but so yeah, I was, I started in university here in Ottawa. I felt like that was the family pressures of like, that's what you're supposed to do, get a post-secondary education. So I was like, all right, I'll get that piece of paper for the wall. Not a 9-to-5 guy traditionally. So I kind of knew that from the hop, I could keep a job. There was no issues with that. It just, an office, like, to each their own. It's just not me. So I was actually out in Kansas City, working on the music side there. I worked with a few artists there, and I was going to Carleton University here in Ottawa, flying back and forth when needed type thing. And I had come back from my last exam. And then from what I heard is, the studio that I was working at ended up, getting into a little bit of trouble. The equipment ended up going missing type thing. And then, so there was nothing really for me to go back to. And I thought at that point, I think it's time that I quote unquote grow up. Let's get a paper job. Let's like start, following the natural steps of, the pressures of society of kind of what we're, guided towards. So I was like, all right, I'll give it a shot. Got a job at the hospital and, working in patient care. I love working with people. So I was like, this is a great job. I was in my early 20s at the time. So I'm like, the money's okay, but the paper trail is excellent. Like it looks very good on paper. So for future endeavors, like at least I have this to kind of fall back on as almost like as a false guarantor. So I was trying to think ahead.
100%.
And at the same time, I started a general contracting company. I had a colleague, a friend of mine, one of my best friends, excellent general contractor, but English was a second language. So he said, hey, can we start a company? We'll team up. You kind of run the front end and the sales stuff. Let me, I'm obviously here swinging the hammer, and let's see what we can do. So I was like, you know what? Let's do it. So we started it. Success-wise, not bad financially and monetary-wise. Like we were actually, generating revenue, getting jobs. But I very, very quickly learned that it was not for me. I did not enjoy it at all. I felt like it was thankless, no matter how hard we were like bending over backwards to make people happy, which also, of course, costs us time and money at the same time. The end product, like people were kind of just like, yeah, thanks for nothing. And I was like, man, for the money, like I kind of felt used and abused. I'm like, I don't need this. So I ran with it for a couple of years and then literally woke up and I was like, I was starting to dread like every time the phone rang and every time the business line rang, I was like, I don't even want to answer it. And like, that's money. But I don't care. Like, I don't care about the money. I'm not enjoying this. I'm not happy. So I just made the decision, like, I'm out. Like I'm closing it down. I'm not selling the business. I'm literally closing the door, like washing my hands of it. I'm done. So that was kind of my first little rock bottom of like internally, like I started something, it didn't really work and I hated it. And I kind of went back to zero, still had the hospital job, which I knew was never going to progress and take me to where I'm destined to be. So I was like, okay, like here's square one, like let's figure it out. But as soon as I shut the doors of the company, my whole mentality shifted and I was like, okay, I'm free. Like I'm not bound by a business that I absolutely despise. So I actually found like my fortunes kind of changing from there. Although down the road, I did hit another personal rock bottom a couple of years later.
Interesting. No. I mean, it totally makes sense though, because once you're kind of out of something that you were so into, it does feel like such a relief. like I've started a few companies on my journey just to complement what you were saying there. And, you know, one of them failed for more environmental reasons. It was a tree company. We didn't water it for a little bit. Business partner on that one, we lost so much trees that we had, but it, you know, okay, business, small, very small for where we started. And then, you know, came across that. And then it really just wasn't substantial enough. We were both doing other things. So it wasn't kind of a means to continue on. Right. And I think one of the bigger things is just the longevity, your willingness to keep going, you know, and grit down there, because if we would have continued, I think, on with that, I think we would have continued to be successful, because we had been in a short period of time, but we just had a pretty big failure for that early on, and we had other things kind of going for us. But through that, and then through shutting it down, though, that even feels like a relief. So recently I've experienced maybe a similar thing without maybe as much negative experience. Turns out people really like buying trees, like they're just like happy about it. So it's kind of funny to go through that, where the opposite was maybe true. People were always kind of, happy to get it twice a year from us on that avenue. But certainly can, appreciate what you're saying there about letting something go and closing it officially. It's big sense of relief ultimately, for sure. And so, and after that happened, then what was up next? You had all this time and energy to put into something else, and like you said, kind of get the cloud off of you is kind of what I'm, imagining in my own world here. And what happened?
Yeah. So then from there, so now I was kind of out of the music industry and out of the music game. Now out of the general contracting game, just working at the hospital. And the hospital was a tough one because I really, really enjoyed the job. Like I loved the day-to-day stuff. I just knew that it wasn't my end all. Like I wasn't fulfilled in that sense. So I was struggling with, didn't mind going to work every day, but then also being like, okay, like I'm spinning my tires as to like who I think that I am, like who I think I'm going to become, how I look at myself. So then I was in that internal struggle, and I actually had a colleague of mine, a buddy, a really, really good friend of mine, kind of saved me. And he just with a suggestion, and he said, I just really think that you would be a great real estate agent. Like I think as a realtor, like it would be your calling. It's like helping people really enjoy. Obviously it's the biggest investment they're making. They're really going to enjoy like working with you, interacting with you on the day to day. And then plus when you finally do get them a house or sell their house, like they are happy. Like you're going to come into pitfalls, but like people generally will be happy at the end of it. And I said, you know what? Like I'm always, as an entrepreneur, but like I'm always a firm believer in education, whether or not it's through an institution or self-education. I think it's super important. I'm always enrolled in like a course or a program for myself at any given time of something that I'm interested in. So whether or not it directly correlates to any of the businesses that I have, if I could pick up a piece of information from anything that I'm learning that I can later apply down the road to any business or any experience that I'm having, well, then it's an investment well made, in my opinion. So I was like, okay, worst case scenario, I'm not even a homeowner. Worst case scenario, I learn about homes, get my license, and like try it. If it works, great. If it doesn't, at least I'm educated, and it's another door that I've opened, checked out what's on the other side. And if it wasn't for me, close it behind me and move on to the next one. Right.
100%.
So
no, that's awesome. Okay. So how long did it take you to do that course on there? Because I've actually worked in the space a little bit, like we mentioned before, but I know it can be like a couple year process, but you could also speed it up and really hammer through it.
Yeah, so it took me about five to 6 months to get through it. I'm pretty sure. Yeah, it was relatively quick. So I just blitzed it. Wanted to get through it as quick as possible. During that time, it was kind of almost an overlap from the time of like closing the general contracting company to getting my real estate license. There wasn't a big gap in there. So like during that kind of transition from the two, I was going around to builders, looking at new building designs and ideas, basically what they were adopting on their new builds, so that for general contracting stuff at the time, I could, general contracting wise, I could have ideas on builds, but then also more importantly, once I got into the real estate space, I knew material names, I knew what was trending, I knew what was in, I was using it as educational purposes. And this is kind of the biggest turning point of my life, to be honest, was there was the day that I was going to the builder to kind of see what they were working on. And I showed up in limbo. So like I had recently just purchased a condo townhouse from my mom that I had a studio built in. She had met a new partner and was moving across town, and I couldn't bear to see the studio be sold. So I was like, hey, one, I'm a hustler. I got to figure out how to get this money to be able to buy this property and get out of the rental space. Like, you know, my girlfriend, now my wife, but like at the time we were renting, and I was like, listen, like we got to make this jump. So we ended up making it happen with basically next to no money, acquire this condo townhouse, which was great. And in the meantime, I was going to the builder to check out supplies and you know, learning this and that. So I got there and pretended that I was a client or a potential homeowner or home buyer, I should say. And I went to this neighborhood, and they actually showed me, you know, we do, you know, gift, just playing the role. And they're like, we have this lot available, a $50,000 discount on it. The deal just fell through. It's closing in a year, yada, yada, yada. You know, it's a good value. And I'm like, okay, well, in my head, I'm like, well, I have $0. So I have like $2,000 to my name or something, probably not even at the time. And I was like, okay, cool. Anyway, we kept talking. And I was like, okay, well, what does it take to like secure a property? So just before I answer that question, I'm going to run it back 2 days before. So 48 hours before I go to this builder's place, my wife introduced me. Like, she knew I was kind of down in the dumps, and she's like, hey, I want you to start trying to change your mindset. And I'm like, sure. Like, I'll just put on a smile on my face and put my thumb up. And she's like, no, it doesn't work that way. So I'm like, okay, what do you suggest? And she's like, have you read The Secret? I'm like, no, I haven't read The Secret. She's like, do you know about The Secret? I'm like, yes, I know about the book, The Secret. I'm not about that. She's like, well, if you haven't read it or looked at it, then how do you know? And I'm like, all right, well, you know what? Fair enough. Looked at the book. I'm like, okay, super small. I can run through this. And it's actually on TV as well. It's like on Netflix or whatever, right? Regardless, I went through The Secret 2 days before I go to these builders, and, you know, trying to change mindset, trying to get my mind right, change my vibrations, all that jazz. And
yeah, good.
I actually played along with the vision board. So I'm like, okay, fair enough. So I do a vision board.
Like it.
All right, you know, we had the condo townhouse that we had just acquired, had been living there for a little bit, but I was like, okay, you know what? Materialistic wise, I'm going to put on a house. I had a decent car, but I think there was probably a car on there. You know, a bunch of other things, not just monetary or materialistic side, but I did do the classic check, put a check written out to myself for $25,000, put it on this vision board, and, you know, felt absolutely ridiculous doing it, but nonetheless, I did it.
Yeah.
Fast forward 48 hours, I'm at the builder's office, and they're like, oh, for you to secure the lot, obviously we don't need the down payment for a year until you take possession, but it's $25,000 deposit. So I'm like, okay. I'm like, all right, well, you know, I just wrote a check for 25 grand, which I do not have in my bank account, but I'm like, oddly enough. So I was like, you know what? For some reason, I just felt like it was the right fit for me. Like, there was just something about it that I was like, something's speaking to me here. I think I got to do something. And so I left the builder's office. I drove to the bank, sat down with somebody, like got an appointment right away, sat down with somebody, and basically said, like, is it possible for me to open a line of credit or get a loan? And I'd never done that before. I had credit cards. I had good credit, pay my bills. So I'm like, okay. And, you know, and I had a car. So I was making car payments, this, that, and the other. And they were like, if you, they took all my info. I've been banking there since I was a kid. And they're like, well, before we have to go too deep, we do have a pre-approval here for a line of credit at $25,000. Are you interested? Or do you want us to go further down the road? And I'm like, so like, if I just say, okay, you'll give me $25,000. And they're like, well, yeah, like we'll open a line of credit for you of $25,000. I'm like, how long does it take? She's like, I'll open it right now. Like, they're like, I'll open it right now. I'm like, oh, okay. So let's open it. So I opened it. Awesome. And then I said, well, can you write me a check? And they're like, for how much? I'm like, $25,000 out of the line of credit. And they were sitting there like, yeah, like technically we can. We don't normally empty a line of credit 2 minutes after it's been opened. And I said, listen,
Right.
I'm going to buy a house. So I need it made out to yada, 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 builder's name. I'm going to buy a house. And rules were a little bit different back then. So they were like, okay,
Right.
okay, go for it. So I took the check, put it in my pocket, then obviously was smart enough, went home, got my wife, didn't tell her anything, but I got her, drove back to the builder, and we chatted with them, and they said somebody else has come in to purchase this, purchase the spot, but we did give you 2 hours. You know, you said you were going to go speak to the bank. We gave you 2 hours. What do you want to do? And like, you know, she's looking at me like, what are we doing here? One, and like, what are they talking about the bank? And I was like, listen, this is the opportunity. This is what I'm thinking. Worst case, we do have the condo townhouse. Like we have our townhouse. We could sell it, hopefully make some money on it in a year. And the proceeds we can use towards this house. But my goal is to level up. My goal is to buy this house, keep that house. I have a year to hustle, and make it happen. And we're going to start our own little real estate empire. And she was like, I pull out the check, and she's kind of looking at me like, oh, okay, like this is all happening pretty quick. Anyway, we did it. We signed the piece of paper. We locked in. We got in the car. First thing, she looks to me and she's like, did we just buy a house? And I'm like, I think so. Yeah. So there we go. Awesome. That was the start of me, you know, and it didn't take long. But after that moment, my whole mindset, my whole like kind of philosophy and outlook and perspective on life completely did a 180. So then, you know, I completely changed. We ended up getting into that house. We were super strapped when we moved in, but I was able to keep the condo townhouse, which I still own to this day. And from that point, we got in there in October. It was December that I hit my own personal, like second rock bottom internally. And it was, you know, from the outside looking in, for most people, it wouldn't be an issue. But for me, I just remember how I felt. So it was Christmas time. You know, we were pregnant. I think we were expecting, and we were expecting. So then Christmas time, I bought a new artificial tree. So don't hold this against me, but I did buy an artificial Christmas tree, and you know, we needed one for the house, and I got that. But I remember it was like December 1st, and I was like, I'm just started in real estate, you know, in like September. We closed on this new build in October.
Right.
We don't have any money. I have 2 mortgages now. You know, I'm still trying to get rent. Like I got renters in the other one in the townhouse now, but like everything's just been happening fast. I haven't been able to replenish any bank accounts. I don't have any money to buy like Christmas presents, like for my family, for my wife. And I just like, we're big Christmas people. And I just felt like, I just felt like I wasn't able to provide for my family, and I felt terrible. Like it was just, I was so embarrassed, and I do have pride, and I just wasn't in a good space in the sense of like, I just never, and then, you know, you take a step back now and it's like, man, look at all the great things that were happening. It was like starting a new career, got a new house, got to keep the other house. There were such great moves that were being made, and like, it wasn't lost on me. I couldn't shake how I actually felt. Like, that's just how I felt to my core. So I just said, like, I'm never going to feel like this again. I'm never going to be in this position again. I went through it once with the general contracting that I hated. This is for a different reason, that I actually am like super, super stuck, and I've never been, you know, my back to the wall this hard before. So then I just made it a point that I'm never looking back. And 8 years later, we've never looked back.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
That is, and so go back to one thing there. How would you describe that feeling? Because I've done similar things, both in buying real estate, and for one of the first jobs that I've ever had was in landscaping. And I just kind of, a line came out of my mouth. I had actually never done sod before, but the same way that you were describing showing up with the check and doing this stuff. And someone asked me one time, they're like, can you do sod? We have to sod over this garden. And the line that came out of my mouth was, yeah, it's just like laying carpet. And I have never laid carpet and I have laid sod now, but I had never done either of the things when I said that, when I was about 15 to 16. And I remember going home and just being like, oh, what did I do? But then I soon figured out a couple things. One, how to lay sod, and it is actually quite easy. But then I also figured out how to buy it wholesale. So not only did I capitalize on charging for the work, but I also was able to make money off kind of like selling it to them as well at a discounted rate versus retail. So it looked like a win-win on the books, or like, for the invoicing side there. And then that just kind of spun into a thing through my teens that I, rinse, cycled, and repeated several times. But that moment where you say something and then you're figuring it out, like you go to the bank and kind of, I said, like, I'm kind of running a parallel here, but how would you describe that feeling of like unknown, excitement, uncertainty within that experience though? Is
I
there a
live
word or a
Yeah,
way
I
to?
live for it. I live for it.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
cherish those. Our philosophy at home is like, whenever we hit a pitfall, whenever we hit a snag, whenever, it hits the fan, you can be upset about it. You can vent about it. You can go through those emotions. Like, that's okay. Take your time. If it takes 10 minutes or if it takes an hour, that's okay. But at the conclusion is always going to be a smile, whether it's a sarcastic one or a legitimate one. We smile at each
Yeah.
other and we say, we'll figure it out. We always figure it out. There's always a way out. Problem solving is one. I think I'm pretty decent at it. Two, I enjoy doing it. I love figuring it out. And that's part of my hustle as an entrepreneur, is that I intentionally, so that I don't get complacent or I don't get lazy. And I also love the chase, that I intentionally set myself up by putting my back against the wall now. So to the sense of like, and it's not, it's to the detriment, like not to the detriment, sorry, but it's to the despair, I should say, of my financial advisor and my accountant. But like, if I get $10, like, I'm very happy to give 4 of it away and know that I'm doing a good thing. I'm putting that positive energy out, those vibrations, like it's going to come back to me in abundance. And I truly believe that, but it also sets me up to be like, okay, well, I'm not as comfortable as I thought I was. So like, back against the wall, let's get back to work. Let's hustle. Let's really fight for it. Because then when I get to the finish line, I know that I actually had to work hard to achieve it. And it's not like, I'm on a dynasty where I'm winning the championship every year. Not to say that's not hard work, but it might become an expectation, but it also just doesn't, it might not be as glorious the 4th time around as it is the first. But if you trick yourself into that adversity and you have to like fight your way out, well, then it's like, oh man, this was a great accomplishment. I never take it for granted. And it helps me keep my feet on the ground, where I never really take anything for granted. I kind of enjoy everything that I do. And that also means that I like, it's kind of sick, but I like feeling both sides. Like I don't want to ride the roller coaster, but I do like feeling not down, I don't want to say, but like, I like feeling like my back's against the wall and I actually have to like strap my shoes up to like make it out of here.
No, that totally makes sense. Do you find a sense of like, I mean, there's only like the move forward. There's no really other option than to be successful. And maybe that's why you do find success by putting yourself in those positions.
Yeah, I think so. Because there is no other option, right?
Yeah.
Like it's, and the thing is I have, I do have a very quality that I'm super proud of myself, is that I do not have a fear of failure. So I don't care about if something flops and like people are on the outside looking in. I have zero, like to this day, like I could be successful in 5 other businesses. If I start one and it flops, like, or it doesn't work out, no issues with me trying to like mask that or hide it. It's like, hey, I tried it. It wasn't for me, or I didn't work. Like I didn't do it properly, this, that, and the other. That's okay. Like I'm totally good with that. So I think part of the reason that I've been able to achieve a level of success that I'm super content and super fulfilled with is that I don't have that hesitation. Like I obviously don't just do things on a whim all the time. Like I do my research. I consult with people that I trust and that I know are in the industry. I educate myself or get educated. So I take those steps, but I don't have any fear when I get into something. It's like, I'm going to make this work. And then in the back of my mind, I'm like, if it doesn't though, I'm good with that. Like I don't need this to be me.
Interesting.
So
yeah, no, I like that a lot. When did that start for you?
What's that, sorry?
On that avenue? Because when did that like mindset or thought process start for you of it not having to be like doesn't have to be a win. Like if it fails, it's not the worst thing. Cause I know that I think is one of the biggest reasons I've seen the shorts online that do discuss this topic specifically, but I really do believe it's a really big limiting factor for a lot of folks why they don't go and try something is because they're afraid of the failure that may come along with it. And, you know, the I'll just describe how I think that is, you know, to be, but it's the, you know, the imaginary fingers get pointed out, like they failed at this or whatever. And I don't really see it that way either now after, you know, doing a couple different startups and being in a partnership and a tech thing that did fail and stuff. It was just a lot of really good learnings about how to move forward in other areas, but took a while to get there for me for sure. And I know kind of when it started, but I'm curious to know when that started for you, or if it's always been, you've never, you know, really looked back twice on learning stuff.
Yeah, no, I haven't really looked back. I've always been pretty mindful of if whether or not something works or doesn't work, like what did I learn from it? How is it going to improve me moving forward? And I'm also pretty good at making fun of myself too. So like, you know, if something didn't work out, I'm okay being successful down the road in something else and be like, man, I didn't know diddly then, but imagine I tried to start that now. Like imagine where I would be and like just joke about it.
Right.
And like,
100%.
and that's not that I'm going to circle back and go to it. It's just like, just,
Yeah.
you know, make light of it and move on. Cause there was a reason that at the time, like that didn't work
Right.
for a reason. It was, and I always know that it's not going to be because of work ethic or consistency or commitment. I know that that's not the reason it didn't work.
Right.
Maybe I just wasn't suited for it. Maybe I just wasn't good enough at it. It wasn't a natural enough fit that I was passionate or I wasn't passionate enough about it. That's all good because I needed that to move to the side so that the right opportunity could present itself to me at the time that it was supposed to, so that I could move on to the next. And I adopt that now. Whereas like, no matter what comes across my desk now, I'm very fortunate to be in a position where I'm not looking at the numbers necessarily. So it doesn't matter to me what the return is on an investment. Of course, sorry, don't clip that. It does matter what the return on the investment is. That's not what drives me to do the move, to make the move, to jump into that opportunity isn't ever driven by money. It's always driven now by a place of interest and passion. If I don't care about it, I'm not doing it. If somebody's like, this is going to be super lucrative and make you a ton of money, unless I literally have to do absolutely nothing on it, and it's just like a silence, somebody else is taking the reins and I just get to collect, well, then it's a no-brainer. But if it's something that I actually have to invest time and energy in, I know how I am. I know how I operate. If it's something that doesn't interest me, I'm not going to do it. I don't care about the money, because as soon as I say no, tomorrow something else is going to come across and it's going to be like, oh my God, like, thank God I'm not tied up in that garbage. Like, let's jump into this and let's create a legacy here, you know? And you have to get to a point where you're able to do that. And you know, and especially financially, you have to, that was the switch. You know, I started working with Ryan Serhant in New York. He's the most followed brokerage in the entire world at Serhant for $1 Million Listing. Actually, quick plug to him. He's got a new show coming out this, I think this summer. What is it? Like Owning Manhattan or something like that. New show on Netflix. The guy's, he's a legend. And
nice.
Yeah. So he and I work together, and he's basically helped me, like, you know, I was on my path doing very well. He's obviously giving me that push to really accelerate and elevate me in the real estate world. But that's something that we discussed, you know, at the beginning of our kind of relationship, our business relationship, just like my drive and being relentless, and having to get to a certain spot financially so that I can kind of shift my perspective and like change my life, rather than having to worry about the next paycheck or like stacking the bank account or making sure that the family's good. So I was able to do that kind of just before meeting Ryan. And then once we met, and started chopping it up, then I was in a position to really get what he was putting down, because I wasn't concerned about just the paycheck. And I was using a lot of the stuff that we were discussing for other businesses, not just my real estate business. So it was super enlightening.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I really appreciate what you said there about like what you're passionate about and where you spend your energy investing in, both like for yourself and financially. I think that is very important. And even for folks that are looking to like raise money in the startup scene, I think it's important to find like the right partner. I have been there before on that side of me with investors, and it's so interesting actually to get in the minds of some of those folks and the psychology behind how they make decisions on the investment side, because it's not about that ROI all the time. If it, sharing that story is just of such a higher value, and finding the right partnership. It's like any, relationship, whether that be personal or in business, there's so many overlays on that one. I just think that's so cool to hear you say. That will definitely be a short from here.
Nice.
In terms of like that clip, absolutely. But it's just so cool. And I think if more people understood that, they'd think about it differently.
Yeah. Sorry to cut you off there, Stephen.
No.
Lose it. That's a non-negotiable for me in life. So it's, don't be afraid to say no. Like, don't hesitate to say no. And that goes across the board. So that's socially, that's in business. Aside from dentist, I say this is a catch line for me, but aside from like dentists, doctors, lawyers, if I'm not into it, then I don't do it. If somebody asks me to do something and I'm not feeling it, I say no. Right. I don't have to come up with an excuse. I let them know, thanks, I'm not feeling it. It's not for me. I'm out. And I do that. Same thing for a business opportunity. If I look at it, I'm like, you know what? I'm just not feeling it. My gut's telling me no. My heart's not into it. Sure, the numbers look good. Thanks, but no thanks. And what that does is it gives me the freedom, that peace of mind, that anything that I am taking on, it's the same thing as jumping on the podcast. If I didn't want us to connect and us to chop it up for 45 minutes, then I wouldn't do it. But on the flip side, it adds so much on the other end, because people that actually know me and like get to know me, they know that if I am doing something and I'm present with them, they know that I not only that I'm there, but that I really, really, really want to be there. So then it changes the dynamic where they're like,
totally,
yo, Sean Frost is coming, like Frosty's coming, like this, that, and the other. And they're like, yeah. And they're like, well, damn, this must be good. Like, he must really want to be here, because otherwise he would just say, no.
Yeah.
Right. So
I think
it's cool. It feels really, really good. And that was the hardest struggle for me, because I'm a people pleaser. So it took me so long to be able to get over that hump. Like, I would always just say, yeah, let's do it. And, I'd end up at an event or end up somewhere. And of course you run into the instances where you're like, hey, I'm really glad I came. But the majority of the time you're like, oh, I should have just said no. Like, what am I doing here? I should have just said no. I could have been doing anything else that I actually want to do right now. My time is limited on this planet. Why am I spending it doing something that I don't even care about? Like, this is crazy. And then you start going down the rabbit hole in your mind. Like, I'm literally wasting my life, like time of my life right now,
Yeah. Now, maybe that's a good question about like kind of on the avenue of like, how do you say no, or how far out does your calendar look? Because I know it's something that is like important to me. I'm wondering if this is something that you do too, in terms of like planning, so where your time is spent, and how do you make time for things that do come up within that calendar, and that my assumption on your planning, if you're talking like this, you're probably a little bit similar that way of having a plan set out in place.
Yeah. So I time block right now important things on my day-to-day. So I know the important times of my every day. So throughout the week, I know I'm dropping my kid off at school. I'm picking my son up at school. I'm trying to spend almost as many minutes as I can from the moment he gets off school till the time he goes to bed, Monday to Friday. And I'm trying to spend as much time with him as possible on the weekends, of course. So being in real estate, buying, selling, doing showings, owning 2 custom home construction companies, working in the music industry, both here in Ottawa and in Los Angeles on a totally different time zone, with my artist at Columbia Records, and working with an independent wrestler that's on the come up, as well as being a property manager, and a property investment corporation with a bunch of guys that I'm, best friends with since elementary school, basically. That becomes super important on how I schedule my day. So I do make sure I wake up before my son wakes up every day, and I'm pounding out, like, I've got my to-do lists are set. I'm pretty organized. I'm running through my CRMs and my to-do list first thing in the morning, and I'm trying to get about an 8-hour workday done in 2 hours before my son gets up. Then from there, of course, I take him to school. My day's then open for exercising, any errands in terms of like showings and on the road work I have to do, manning the phones. And then same thing in the evening. Once he goes to bed, well, then I'm in a position where if he's going to bed at 9, well, the day's not over. I can
Right. You're still
easily
able to
jump back
go.
into the office and get some more work done if needed, right? And if not, then that gets scheduled for the next morning. I always make sure that I'm not waking up, working and going to bed, and then working and going to bed. Like there has to be some separation there, in the sense that I don't want to,
Right.
start believing that I'm literally working from the moment I wake up to the moment I go to bed. But I also trick
Right.
myself into knowing that I don't have the separation. I don't separate work life, family life, and social life. I have it all mixed together. It's all life. It's all part of my life,
Yes.
because everything that I do, I'm passionate about. I love every aspect of the stuff that I'm doing. Of course, you run into like tough clients or a deal, something happening with a deal or something going, having a negative turn that's out of your control and you have to deal with it. That happens to everybody. But
Right.
if you're passionate about everything that you're doing, then why not just blend everything? Like that way I never look at the phone when it rings at dinner time and I'm like, oh man, like I'm not supposed to be working right now, right? Like, no, like if it's
Right.
appropriate and I have to take the call, take the quick call, hang up, get back to my family. Just be present and try to be as present as you can in any situation, like whoever you're with. And I think that's the biggest change. But timing wise, like there's so much time during the day and we all have the same amount of time, right? So when people
Yep.
are like, oh, I didn't have time to do that. Yeah, of course. If something runs unforeseenly long, of course, that's out of your control. But generally, there's probably another time during that day or the next day that you can get caught up on it.
Absolutely. No, I think that's great. How do you help your like manage all this stuff within the current dynamic? I'm assuming that there's a team behind you working on or many teams by the sounds of things here. And how did you build those out? What's the key in your eyes for the success there?
Yeah, great question. So I do have a couple admins. I have an event coordinator. I have a VA that's excellent as well. I do have junior agents under me on the real estate side. And then all the other entities that I have, the majority of them, I have a partner. So that's definitely a strategy of mine, is never be the only person at the helm. Two reasons. One, because time and energy. I don't want to be the one that I have to be able to carry the bag all the time. Two, I do it because it's usually with somebody that's got just as much experience or more in that field. It's also
Yeah.
somebody that's their bread and butter. So they need this to work. They actually need it to work.
Right.
So then I know that my investment is in good hands, because if it falls through for me, it's not going to affect my daily life necessarily. If it falls through for them, they're going to feel it. So I know that they
Right.
have just as much skin in the game, if not more than I do. So I'm there
Right.
to help accelerate and obviously carry like the weight on my end, but I know that it's in good hands, that somebody's not going to get complacent because they need it to work. So that's
Yeah.
one thing I do on my partnerships. And then the other thing, of course, is just if you have that amount of passion in it, then it's work. Sometimes it feels like work, but the majority of the time it doesn't. You're excited to do it.
Yeah.
So just make the time, figure it out, and make sure that you have proper plans, systems, operations, procedures, all that jazz. Not the most exciting, but you mentioned rinse, rinse, recycle, repeat. It's like you're able to do that for a lot of different business models, whether it's in the music industry
Right.
or real estate side. There's not as many differences as a lot of people think.
Yes, I would, yeah, very much agree with that. I mean, I'm earlier on in the journey, but already starting to see that to be very true. Obviously, other businesses require different things. If you're running like I don't know what it was, some kind of manufacturing, more operations focus, or perhaps like being more hands-on, someone with that understanding is wildly important. Whereas if it's like an online service industry, there doesn't need to be like the hands-on person in that sense, but your processes are not so different. If you're manufacturing, a million widgets or, a million of the service things out there, those processes and, back end accounting, different things are very transferable. It's that pattern that goes along with it. And something that I picked up there, and it's something I've, from what you were saying, it's something that I think about too, is like if something were to fail or change or adjust, like whether that be even on the social media side of things, the talk around TikTok maybe not existing anymore, or what if all the social media things like changed and became different? What would happen? Because I know that's like on the digital side of things, and it's more like we're already really well trained, and my team on consistency and the patterns that go along with that. So it's not really like that big of a hurdle. It's like we just figure out the new way to do it and then get on that train. And do you see that in the same way in terms of like, okay, if something were to like kind of change, adjust, I won't say fail, but that you would not be that shook by it because it's just like, okay, we've seen this before kind of thing? Because you mentioned a couple kind of failures, but I think that they're just really good learnings on the journey where you're like, you know what, this isn't really that big of a deal. We're just shifting, even if there is a monetary loss attached to it. Or how do you look at that? Maybe I'm asking more that way.
No, and that no, you nailed it. It's it's an adaptation, right? So you're adapting, you're changing
Yeah,
with
I
the
guess so.
times, and then just change your perspective on that and change the word adaptation for growth, right? And it's like things are
Yeah.
changing, but you're growing, and when we stop growing, we die. So it's like, right? So I'm like, okay,
Yeah.
if we have to change things up, all right, we're kind of expanding our knowledge. If things end up switching back or trending back towards the way that they were, well, we're already covered there. Let's get ahead of the curve. Figure out, we already, like you said, we already have the work ethic. We already have the procedures. If we have to make some changes to go with the times, then that's all good. But we're learning and we're growing while we're doing it. It's only going to help us when it switches again and another fork comes in the road. You're going to be ready to at least be at that fork in the road because you're still traveling along the road.
Yeah, absolutely. And that momentum, I think, behind whatever that is going there. Now, this is going to be a different question. I'm not sure how this is going to come out of my head, but we'll walk through this one. It was something that you started off on your journey early on, but then you mentioned the word, vibration, and I have seen this a couple times work really well for me, just in terms of like momentum and things happening. Do you think that there's like kind of a connection between the music industry and what we see out there for vibration? I've been thinking about this quite a bit, and the success that we see with folks that are really tapped into different beats per minute, things like that, and how we have success in the business world and vibration within people, and what that connection really is on a deeper level.
Yeah, that's a tough one because it's hard to speak, like I know how I am and I know how I am with music. And
Yeah.
I'm like you, like I'm massive into vibrations and energy put out. Just because I know where my life was before that and I know where it's been since I've adopted that ideology. So
Yeah.
I'm very conscious about it. Obviously, being a music guy, I do listen to a ton of different types of music. I know, maybe not down to the beats per minute, but more so on the genre side,
Right.
what fuels me, like what I need to listen to when and where. So I'm
Yes.
very, and I don't do it intentionally. I just naturally know what I'm listening to. Like I don't really ever, I don't know if other people do, but like I never sit there and be like, oh, what am I going to listen to right now? Like I just
Right.
I never have that. I'm like, okay, like this is the mode that I'm in. Like, I'm either asking like a smart home device or asking my phone or asking somebody like, okay, throw this on. Like I'm in the middle of doing something. And like I get in the car, I'm like, this is what I'm doing, or this is where I'm going. Like, this is what I need to listen to. And like, it's not always the same
Right.
thing, but it's
Yeah.
like, I know what it is. And I'm feeding off that just as it's feeding off me. And then I'm also using that music. Like, I'm not just using it to think about my future or working with the present, but, I'm a firm believer that, music is the closest, and this is my own, my own thought, but like, I think that music is basically, aside from like, it's pretty cool to watch like an old recording, like a video recording of something that happened in the past that'll take you there. But, I think in general for a regular day, like I don't think there's anything closer to time travel than there is to listening to music. So whereas you can listen
Interesting.
to a record from when you were a kid or something that you
Right.
gravitated to at a certain period in your life, like you could be almost anywhere as
Yeah.
long as especially if you're still in that little mindset, like at that moment, you could listen to that record
Right.
and it takes you right back to that spot where you can see, you don't even have to physically see it on a screen. You could see it through your mind's eye and be like, oh my God, like I remember exactly how I felt. Sometimes you can remember what you smelt, like, if you're in a
Yes.
field, right? Like you get
Yes.
all those sensory,
Yeah.
they just start overflowing again and overwhelming you. And it's like, you could time travel back there. So I think the vibrations from the music there can actually take you back. They can help you deal with the present. And then they can also like fuel you for the future, which is why like, I just think it's the greatest, like that's why I've circled back. I ended up, having that artist brought to me. And I was like, as soon as I heard him, I'm like, yo, this guy's got it. Like at the time he was a kid. I'm like, this kid's got it. Like, what are we doing? And they're like, well, this is like, we've got nothing. And I was like, yeah, sign me up. I'll get him to where he needs to go. Like, I'll help him get there. And sure
That's
enough, we
awesome.
signed a major record deal in the United States. Like, he lives in LA,
Awesome.
you know, like, yeah.
Very cool. No, I think that's such a cool answer. And even what you were saying there about like the other sensory things that do come along with that, have experienced that big, like that's yeah, right up my tree too, in terms of, yeah, hitting those memory blocks. That's so interesting that you said that. And I think that there is something deeper there, to definitely unpack. And yeah, that could be a whole episode
Yeah.
on its own there for sure. But Sean, what's the best way for folks to maybe like get in touch? I know we have the social media underneath your name here, and we'll have a write up on the episode. If someone's listening, they'll have access to that. But what's the best way to follow you out there and follow more of the journey?
Yeah, the easiest, you know, it can get, you know, a little convoluted with the different businesses and different websites, this and that, and the amount of platforms that are out there, especially socially. My go-to is, well, one, you can email me, right? You can always email me at sean@seanfrost.com. But the easiest way is definitely on Instagram. It's what I'm most active at, because time is of the essence. You know, I do lack in a lot of social platforms in terms of like what I'm spending time and effort wise, but Instagram is my go-to. Like, I've chosen that this is the social platform that I'm going to be using. I do like it because I showcase everything from my personal side. So family life, a lot of stuff on my son, to, you know, passions of mine socially and stuff that I'm into, especially a lot of like wrestling and soccer stuff, and the give back to the community. And then also then focus on the real estate and the music business. So you really actually like, you get to know me. And if you hit me up on the Instagram side, well, then I can obviously check you out on the other end and get to know you. So if we end up building a connection, it's not just a one way where you're like, hey, like, I saw your podcast, this is what you're about. And then you have to be like, so this is me. And then it's like, are we auditioning
Right.
to be friends here? Like, otherwise it's just a great connection. Like, you can hit me up, say something, I'll check you out. And if I like what you're putting down, well, and I follow you, well, then you know that I actually want to follow you. Because if I wasn't feeling it, then I wouldn't do it.
Yeah, and I think that resonates very well, for, you know, conversation we had prior to on here, and hopefully after this too, is just the piece that I think is missing in a lot of like the social media pages today is the genuineness, because sometimes folks are going for that follow for follow, and I think sometimes it's not as, you know, like that. I mean, obviously with people trying to grow businesses, they're trying to go for the masses initially. And I totally understand that you kind of have to survive, right? You're just trying to get in front of as many faces. But then at some point you kind of look back and you're like, okay, let's focus on the core. What are we really good at? Did we follow off the journey's path there a little bit, and kind of get back down to, you know, being that, you know, looking into that deeper self, to kind of ultimately present that out there, because you're just going to connect with the right folks for your journey that way. So I love the way that you said that, and mentioned that a couple of times in here too. And I think that's great to hear that.
Yeah. And that's, like you said, like the follow for follow, or whatever the tactic is, you know, treat it depending on what you're doing. I'm an entrepreneur, so I figured that having one social platform is going to be pretty crucial for me and my businesses down the road. So let's build it out
Yeah.
as a business, but then showcase me as the product, right? So I'm building it as a
100%.
business. I'm selling it as a business, as a brand, I should say. It's a personal brand. So I'm selling it as a brand, but you're getting everything of me in between. So the hope is that, you know, using it as a brand or a business, I'm going to get the awareness of people getting eyes on it. Then I'm hoping me as the product is going to be enough to get them, attach them to it and stay to it and keep those connections going. Right. So that's basically the way that I use it.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. Well, Sean, this has been great. I really appreciate you making time to be on here in the schedule that you have. And I'm excited already for what might be a 2.0 on here.
Yeah, I'm
already.
with it, man.
Manifesting that for season 3 here. We're partway through season 2, and it's been a pleasure to have you on here today, and look forward to staying in touch.
Yeah, likewise, Stephen. Thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it. And yeah, keep doing what you're doing. And I'm around, man. You ever need me, I'm literally a click away. So
No, absolutely. We will be doing that. So
right on.
thanks, Sean.
Cheers, Stephen.